This is the most misunderstood tool in your shop. Too slow for most rough construction type work, too rough for most finish work. It's a tool a lot of folks buy and almost never use. But the fact is, this can be one of the most versatile handheld power tools in your shop. In this video, I'll show you how to use it the right way, including some tips that I'll bet you've never heard before. By the end of this video, the Jigsaw may just become one of your favorite tools. So let's get started. The term jigsaw is a little confusing because it's been applied to different tools over time. When I was in 8th grade shop class, I was taught that this was a jigsaw and this was a saber saw. Technically, a jigsaw is any tool where the blade moves up and down in a reciprocating motion. That means this, and this are all technically examples of jigsaws. But nowadays, in the US at least, we commonly call this a scroll saw, this a reciprocating saw, and this a jigsaw. This particular saw has a lower profile, so the center of gravity is closer to the material. That makes it a little easier to maneuver. It's nice, but I wouldn't consider it a must-have feature. I do like a saw with a variable speed mechanism, so I can run fast for softwoods, a bit slower for hardwoods, and really slow for metals. Some saws have an orbital feature, which moves the blade slightly forward and back as it goes up and down. This produces a more aggressive cut that's certainly faster, especially in softwoods, as long as you don't mind some extra splintering along your cut. I also insist on a saw that has a quick release feature for fast toolless blade changes. That usually means the saw requires T-shank blades as opposed to U-shanks, which often require an Allen key and a set screw to hold them in place. I wouldn't give $1 for an old U-shank saw at a yard sale. High carbon steel blades are a good value for wood cutting as well as MDF and plastics. They also are a little more flexible, so they're less prone to breaking. High-speed steel blades stay sharp a bit longer, and they can be used to cut wood as well as non-ferrous metals like brass and aluminum. However, they're a bit more brittle, so you have to be more careful, especially when you're cutting curves where the blade might bind in the curve. Bimetal blades are perhaps the most common nowadays. They combine the flexibility of high carbon steel with the durability of high speed steel. You can also buy carbide tip blades for cutting through nails and other tough jobs, or abrasive blades coated with carbide chips or diamond dust to cut tile and glass, brick, concrete, that sort of thing. As far as tooth count is concerned, generally the fewer the teeth, the faster the blade will cut, but the rougher the results may be. Faster cuts aren't just about saving time though. If you have a thick material, such as a 2x4, you need a blade that will remove all that wood more efficiently or you're going to generate a lot of blade dulling heat in the curve. I think something around 6 teeth per inch is best for thick materials. 10 teeth per inch is a good all-purpose blade for mostly 3/4 inch thick stock. If you're working with a lot of 1/4 inch or thinner material, you might look for something a bit finer than 10 teeth per inch. Very dense materials, such as acrylics and metals, require very fine teeth to limit the aggressiveness of the cut. Around 24 teeth per inch is a good range for those materials. Choosing the right blade is only the first step toward getting a high quality cut with your jigsaw. You have to understand how the saw functions. Most blades feature upward pointing teeth. This pulls the saw downward toward the workpiece and makes it easier to control the tool as compared to a blade with downward facing teeth that might want to lift the saw off your work with every stroke. Upward facing teeth are most likely to tear at the wood fibers as they exit the cut on the top of the workpiece. So that means in most cases you want the good side of the board, the one that will be most visible in the completed project, facing downward. This is especially true when you're cutting across the grain, which is when most tear out occurs. But what if you need a clean edge on the top side of the workpiece? As I mentioned, reverse tooth blades are available that cut on the downward stroke. These are most commonly used for cutting laminate, such as countertops, and you have to be really careful to hold your saw tight on the surface as you cut. Of course, that just transfers the tear out from the top surface to the bottom. What if you can't tolerate it on either side of the board? Well, in that case, you might put a piece of painter's tape on the top side of your work and cut through that. The tape helps reinforce the surface fibers so they're less likely to tear along the edges of the cut. Perhaps the biggest complaint many people have about their jigsaw is their inability to get square edges because the blade deflects while they cut. While a cheap saw may not guide the blade as well as it should, the problem is most likely just how you're using the tool. When making any cut, be it straight or curved, you have to let the blade do the work. If you try to cut faster than the teeth can remove material, you'll put too much stress on the blade and it can wander and deflect within the curve. This may mean applying less force with fine-toothed blades or narrow blades that may bend more easily. A dull blade will almost always deflect a lot more than a sharp one. Jigsaw blades are not expensive. There's no reason to use a dull blade. Keep some extras on hand and swap them out as soon as they begin to dull. Deflection is most common during curved cuts because folks tend to steer the saw by moving it sideways. Examine your technique closely. You might find that even though you're rotating the saw, you're still pushing it to the side a bit. I think another cause is a misunderstanding of where the pivot point of the saw is. It should be at the front of the blade, not the center of the base. So don't twist the whole saw, pivot at the front and let the back follow the blade. This takes a little practice, but it will be easier if you keep your eye fixed on the front of the blade while the cutting occurs as you maneuver around a curve. Jigsaws really excel at cutting curves, but tight turns can be a challenge. You have to get a feel for how you can turn the tool before the blade binds in the curve and starts jumping all over the place. Often this comes down to maintaining forward progress. It's natural to slow the tool as you make a tight curve, but you can't stop completely. You have to move forward as you pivot the blade or it's going to bind. It may help to put a little wax on the base of the saw's shoe. This will reduce friction and make it easier to turn the tool smoothly. The width of the blade can also limit the radius your tool is capable of cutting. Narrower blades can cut tighter curves, but they may also flex more, so you have to be extra vigilant about deflection. Sometimes the best solution is to make some relief cuts. These cuts allow the material to fall away as you turn, giving the blade more room to work so it can cut a tighter curve than it otherwise might. Never underestimate how useful your jigsaw can be. For example, it's a far safer tool for breaking down rough lumber into smaller project parts before you mill it, because a jigsaw isn't going to bind and kick back at you like a circular saw might. One of the most common uses of a jigsaw is to make a cutout in the center of a workpiece. The most common method for starting such a cut is to bore a hole that's a little larger than your blade. If you're cutting a circle, one hole might suffice. If you're cutting a square, you might bore holes at all the corners. But that's not the only way to start a cut. You can actually skip the drill and plunge the saw itself. This is done by tipping the saw forward so the tip of the blade is above the work. The flat front of the shoe gives you the stability you need for this technique. As you turn on the saw, start tilting it backwards. Move slowly, letting the blade begin cutting into the wood. Soon after the surface is scored, you'll want to slide the saw forward just a little bit, causing the blade to cut deeper into the wood. With practice, you can make pretty accurate plunge cuts these ways. Another clever way to use a jigsaw is to attach a piece of adhesive back sandpaper to the blade. Turn the speed all the way down, and you can use it as a power file to fine-tune an edge. Just don't use too much pressure because excess heat will ruin your paper in a hurry. Don't forget that your jigsaw can also be used with a fence to make straighter cuts. In fact, some saws have attachable rip fences just like circular saws. We talked about how wax can help your saw move across the surface more smoothly. This is true with both curved and straight cuts. Many saws have plastic shoes, but some have metal ones. Either may create fine scratches in some surfaces. If that's a concern, consider placing a couple strips of painter's tape on the edges to serve as non-marring skis. Finally, I know someone's going to ask why I didn't cover the tilting shoe option common to most jigsaws. There's really not much to say about it. I think I've cut fewer than a handful of bevels with the jigsaw in my lifetime. It's just not my tool of choice for that type of cut. But the option is there if you need it, and all the same rules apply. Choose the right blade, don't force the cut, and maintain forward movement as you turn the tool. The jigsaw is actually one of the safest power tools in the workshop because the exposed portion of the blade is usually beneath the workpiece. However, this does affect how you must support your workpiece during the cut. Let's just say you shouldn't hold the board on your lap while you work. It's a common practice to let the board hang off the edge of a bench as you cut. That's fine as long as enough of it is on the bench to keep it from shifting while you work. If in doubt, clamp it down. Another option is to elevate your workpiece. Some sort of riser blocks are very handy for this purpose. They don't have to be as fancy as these are, as long as they're thick enough. You can use scraps of wood or even chunks of styrofoam. Because the blade moves up and down rather than in a circular motion, a jigsaw is unlikely to violently kick back like a circular saw might, but it can bounce upward if you use poor technique. Perhaps the greatest danger comes at the end of the cut, when some folks grow impatient and they try to withdraw the tool before the reciprocating motion stops. The end of the blade can catch and damage the workpiece, or even a hand placed carelessly nearby. Let the tool fully stop before lifting it from your work. Finally, jigsaws usually run around 100 decibels. It's about 4 times louder than what's considered safe for unprotected ears. So wear hearing protection, safety glasses, and if you're going to be sawing for more than a minute or two, you may even wish to wear a dust mask. I hope this tutorial helps you get better results from your jigsaw, but I have one more interesting thing to share. The Whiteside family has been making router bits in North Carolina for half a century. Their quality is exceptional, their service is fantastic, and I like supporting small family businesses. That's why my cabinet is full of Whiteside bits, and I think yours should be too. Check them out at the link below this video.